Hey everyone and welcome. We're in my wormery and we're visiting in on my two oldest bins today. These oldest bins have been in action now, this one since late February and that one over there since late March. So this one's about a month ahead of that one, but I'm treating them both the same for the most part. They've been horizontally fed and managed in the same way for some time now. And as of a week ago, I have set up the third horizontal migration with the intent of depopulating the bins as a part of that horizontal migration. And by that I mean trying to draw all the worms out of the finished compost into a newly set up section of the bin on the edge where hopefully the worms will move into, leaving the finished compost behind so that the compost can be harvested from the bins. I've got some food items set aside here. Some watermelon rinds. So after a week's time, I was hoping to see some good progress in terms of the worms depopulating the compost and making their way into the new feeding zones. But I wanted to make sure that those feeding zones continue to get replenished so that the worms continue to move out of the compost. So let's get these up onto the bench and see how they're progressing. Okay, so now to keep the interest level high, the food that I've got selected for today's feeding is watermelon, which is what I believe that these bins were originally set up with. I've got this little bin here with which I'm going to extract the leaf cover that's on these feeding zones, just because these leaves are still in pretty good shape as far as a covering is concerned, and we'll continue to use them as such. So I'm just going to remove them off the top, and then we'll sprinkle those leaves back onto the feeding zone after we've replenished the food supply. So a fair amount of leaves came off, and that's going to be plenty to cover up with after the fact. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and take a quick little look through here. Here's a small piece of a banana peel that's still in place. And evidently, this was some watermelon, and I could tell just because of the remaining fleshy material on there. But as far as the worms making their way into here, I can see some here and there. So why don't we see if we can get this camera in a bit closer just so we can take a peek over the edge into what's happening here. The feeding zone is not too deep. It's rather shallow, as a matter of fact. So I'm just going to push things back here. And back here you can see a number of worms congregating around this piece of melon rind. And then here was this other piece of melon rind. So it seems like we're kind of getting there, but the progress appears to be slow. I'm not seeing quite as many worms as I had kind of expected to see in here. So I'm just going to jostle this material around, give the coffee grinds that I see in here sort of a little break up, because they're sort of chunked into little balls. Let's put the camera down over here on the side. And what we'll do is we'll take these more heavily composted, week-old food items and place them right on the edge of the cardboard over here. I'm wondering if that could have something to do with the fact that I've got a pretty strong barrier over here. I'm wondering if I might benefit from perforating this a little bit. It's for that reason I've got this little jackknife here. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to punch through in a couple spots through the cardboard just to give the worms a place to traverse the barrier and give them a way to access the new feeding zone. And then in comes the fresh supply of food for them. So here's a couple nice new pieces of watermelon rind for them. Try to spur on the ongoing migration into this new feeding zone. Okay. And then we'll just go ahead and start covering this up with some of this bedding material that we've already got in here, some of this cardboard. Eventually we'll hopefully begin observing the depopulation of this material. I just figured I'd take a peek into it just to see how things look. So you can see anywhere we check, there's a plethora of worms hanging out within the material. And you can also see scattered bits of food throughout the material, so that might also be another reason that they're not seeking new food supplies, because there's still ample food scattered within the nearly finished compost for them to work on. So this could take some time. We'll see how it progresses, but for now we'll treat this as done, and we'll use this reclaimed leafy material to cover up with. Alrighty. So now back on goes the newspaper cover, which isn't much of a cover, it's just a little bit to help keep the moisture down. And we'll put this one back up on the shelf and get to work on the second one. So this provides a little bit of a better view of what we're doing here, so we'll just keep the camera oriented the way it is here. And this here and this one here, these sprouts can just become worm food. So we'll just include them when we drop in the new food supply. And we'll do the same as we did before, is we're just going to take off some of this leafy matter from the top. So now here too you can see a fair number of worms hanging out on the remains of the previous feeding. So there's a pretty good number of worms hanging out on this piece of melon rind, as you can see. And over here too, this is maybe banana peel. There's some worms hanging out over there too, pretty good. And down here as well, down here within the pit, I could see quite a few too. So maybe in this bin they're just making their way through or under the barrier more easily, or whatever the reason is, but I feel like I'm seeing more worms in this container than we did in the other one. And it might be because I could see already some sections of the cardboard have already kind of been chewed out, maybe by worms just working their way through in a mad rush to get to this fresh food supply over here. And who knows, that could be because the food supply in this material is dwindling more than in the previous bin that we just fed, or who knows why. But you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to take some of these pieces that we could use to cover up with at the end, some of these cardboard scraps I'm finding in here, and then we'll break up a lot of this coffee, which is kind of in big chunks here, kind of make it more accessible if it's in large, if it's more spread out and more easy for the worms to eat. So I'm not having as much luck finding old scraps of food in here as I did in the last bin. There was that first piece that we observed a bunch of worms on top of, which was cool. So we'll just take whatever ones we can locate here quickly and drop them in alongside the wall there, like so. And then in goes the next feeding for them. Okay, so this is the February bin. This is the bin that's a little bit older, 176 days old today. The other one was 147 days old as of today. So it's favorable to see that this bin is progressing more rapidly towards the finish line, which is what we're after. Considering that the oldest bin I've ever had was 193 days old when I called it quits on that bin, the fact that this one is 176 days old means that it's, 2.5 weeks away from potentially becoming my oldest bin ever. And I'd really prefer if by then I've managed to evacuate the worms from the bin as best I could and harvested the castings if possible. So we'll see how things go to that end. I also thought about using some of the worms out of these bins as volunteers for populating or bolstering the population in my new outdoor bin that's outside. But for now I'm not going to do that because there's just, there's some worms hanging out here, but not quite as many as I thought. So hopefully by next week we'll see greater numbers in these feeding zones, and at that point we might start scooping some worms out and moving them into the outside bin. And then if need be, rebuilding these feeding zones just to make them as effective as possible, to make them accomplish their goal. So that's pretty much it for today. I'm going to go ahead and clean up my maintenance bin and get these things covered up and back up on the shelf, but I won't keep you around for that. That's boring work stuff. So if you enjoyed the video, then, as always, please give it a thumbs up and show that you liked it. And also consider becoming a subscriber to the channel. That's always appreciated as well. So with that, I bid you farewell, and hopefully we'll see you back here next time. Take care. Bye now.